Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. In this video, I'm going to be looking at the week starting on Monday, September the 30th, 2024. Now, it is quite a brief video. I don't do 12-sign forecasts in this video. I do daily forecasts for 12 signs, but I don't do weekly forecasts. I just want to look at what's going to be happening over the course of the next week, astrologically. The main astrological events, for example, this week there is an annular eclipse. It's a particular type of new moon, and we've got that. I think that's on October the 2nd. So I'll be looking at the headline astrological events, and at the end of the video I will be doing an I Ching reading for the week, so looking at what the week is going to be like from an I Ching perspective. And that does come at the end of the video. Now, if you don't want your I Ching done for this week, you just don't watch that part of the video, because it only applies to those who are actually watching me talking about the I Ching. If you don't watch the I Ching section, it doesn't apply to you. Now, the other thing I'm going to be covering in this video is my topic, and my topic is going to be this massive Israeli attack on the Hezbollah headquarters in Beirut. And I'm going to be considering, what was going on at the time of the attack, how does this relate to the previous lunation, and it seems that the target of this attack was Hassan Nasrallah. I think he's the General Secretary of Hezbollah. Now, we don't know whether he's still alive. Amazingly, there is a betting site where you can bet on whether he's still going to be head of Hezbollah by the end of October. And this bet has been on for some time, but it suddenly plunged to 23%. So in a way, the betting markets are suggesting that there is actually a 77% chance that he has perhaps been killed or completely incapacitated. So there does seem to be a possibility that he really has been killed. So I will be looking at him. I don't have his time of birth, but he is a Virgo. He's got a birth chart, and that is something I will be looking at. Okay, so let's look at the week ahead. Just a reminder, the usual boring reminder. If you enjoy this video, I'd be grateful if you were to like it. And if you're not subscribed, I'd be really, really happy if you were to subscribe, because it does make a difference to the channel. Okay, so let's look at what's happening this week. So here are the starting positions. Beginning of the week. Midnight on September the 30th, Monday, September the 30th, set for New York. It doesn't particularly matter whether it's set for New York or London or Sydney or anywhere. I have to start somewhere. So that's the beginning of the week. Now, if we look at this chart, by the top right, that is Hassan Nasrallah. We don't know whether he's dead or alive, and he's the head of Hezbollah. So at the start of the week, we have this conjunction between the South Node, Mercury, and the Sun. I mean, I did talk about it at length when I was considering the situation, at the weekend of what we've just gone through, the weekend of the 28th and the 29th. But it's still with us at the beginning of a week. Sun conjunct South Node. Mercury conjunct with South Node. So at the beginning of a week, there is a danger, like as with the weekend, that we go back to the past. We focus on things because they're comfortable, and if we focus too much on the past, well, we might at the very least get nowhere. And it's possible that there are certain ways of thinking, certain ways of behaving that really are no longer useful. And the sooner we move away from them, the better for everyone. Certainly, it's going to be good for us if we can start to be more sort of future orientated. Now, also on Monday, we've got Mars trine Saturn. So Mars is at 1425 Cancer, Saturn 1425 Pisces at the beginning of a week. So that Mars trine Saturn is in some ways not a bad aspect. It's not like a Mars square Saturn or a Mars opposition Saturn. It's about focus, it's about discipline, and it's focus and discipline that perhaps work on an emotional level, because Saturn is in Pisces, is a water sign, Mars is in Cancer, which is another water sign. So we could see that Mars trine Saturn as being about emotional control, and perhaps we can focus our emotions on achieving a particular goal. And so that's how the month ends. September ends with this Mars trine Saturn. Then, as we move into the week, the lunar cycle is coming to its end. And then on October the 2nd, we have a new moon. And it is an annular eclipse. Now, the reason it's called an annular eclipse is because the moon may cross the sun, may appear to block the sun, but it can't make it. There's a ring. So the reason it doesn't make it is because the disk of the moon, I believe, is not large enough to completely cover the sun. So that probably has something to do with the lunar distance from the Earth. So yes, so it's an annular eclipse, an important event potentially. Now, I'm not going to say a great deal about this annular eclipse. It's at 10 degrees Libra. So yes, it is a new beginning of a new cycle. But in a couple of days' time, I will be having a video about this eclipse and what it might mean. And on the same day as the annular eclipse, we have got a sesquiquadrate between Mercury and Uranus. So Mercury and Uranus sesquiquadrate is quite exciting. It's about getting ideas, but there's a certain tension to that sesquiquadrate. You know, we might just feel a sense that we have to do something, or we just might feel a bit nervous with it, or perhaps we're going to say something that maybe we later regret. So perhaps we have to be a bit careful about what we say. Now, the Sun and the Mercury this week are getting really close to each other. You know, at the beginning of the week, Mercury is less than a degree to the Sun, so they are closing on each other. So what aspects one aspects the other. So on Wednesday we have Mercury sesquiquadrate Uranus. On Friday we have Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus. So that means with Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus, it could be about excitement. It could be about things happening that we weren't expecting. And at the same time, there's just going to be this sense of tension. Mercury and Sun sesquiquadrate Uranus, it just feels that something has to happen, that something has to give. And at the end of a week, on the Sunday, we've got the Sun quincunx Saturn. So Saturn is at around sort of 14 Pisces. The Sun will be at around 14 Libra, and so they are making this 150-degree aspect over the weekend. I think that's on October the 6th. So that could be a certain sense of frustration. The Sun wants to do things, wants to make things happen, wants to express itself, but Saturn says no. Saturn can be quite a disciplinarian, though it's not a major aspect and it's not going to last very long. So that's the broad picture this week. I would have said that the most important aspect is this new moon, the new moon on Wednesday, October the 2nd. So as far as my topic is concerned, we've had this big Israeli attack on the headquarters of Hezbollah. So as far as I can make out, this attack was at around 6:30 in the evening. I I'm not 100% sure, but I've got the timing absolutely right there. I did my best to go through different news sites to try to work out what was the most likely time, and I came up with 6:30 p.m. So that's the chart of the attack here, and Sun conjunct the South Node, Mercury conjunct the South Node. If indeed it was at 6:30 p.m., we would have had Leo rising and perhaps had the North Node on the ascendant. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this chart is not particularly dramatic. It doesn't scream at you, this is something huge happened at this moment. It doesn't really quite do that. But we have the moon in Leo. I mean, what is happening to the moon in Leo? I mean, not a great deal. The moon is trine the North Node. I mean, I just don't get the feel particularly of an attack with this chart, at least on the surface. It's when you start getting into the details, when you start to dissect it from the perspective of midpoints, that you start to see the drama there. But just as a regular chart, I'm not absolutely convinced. You could say, well, Mars semi-square Uranus. I mean, I did talk about Mars semi-square Uranus, and I thought that Mars semi-square Uranus would perhaps indicate a difficult event on Wednesday or Thursday. Friday? Well, you see, this Mars square Uranus is not exact. It's actually 1.5 degrees off. I mean, that's quite a way. So I think that the Mars semi-square Uranus might give some indication, but it's 45 degrees, a 45-degree aspect. It's not particularly strong on its own. So let's look at the lunation before the event. And so, when you look at a new or a full moon, you try to work out where that new or full moon is likely to have maximum impact. So what we're doing here is we're looking at the thing from the perspective of 2020 hindsight. So here is the lunation before the attack. So this is September the 18th, 2024. I've set it for Beirut. So this was sort of, 9 days before the attack. And so you can see that this lunation, this was a full moon, and it was a full moon at 2841 Pisces. So the idea is that this lunation would somehow herald the attack. So can we see anything difficult about this lunation with particular reference to the ascendant and the midheaven? So you can see that the midheaven is, so there's the midheaven at 13 Gemini. Now Mercury is exactly on the ascendant, and Saturn is exactly on the descendant. So it looks like being a Mercury-Saturn event for Lebanon. And I don't think you would, at least at first sight, see that as being connected with explosions or explosives. It might be certainly a difficult time for Lebanon, but does this indicate war or destruction and death and so forth? Well, I suppose you could say that Saturn is in the 7th house on a descendant. That perhaps represents a country's enemies or outside forces causing a lot of death and destruction. You might say that. And the moon is also in the 7th house. And so that, the full moon across the first 7th house cusp, the first and 7th houses, could have some sort of negative impact. But I'm not entirely convinced that on its own that full moon is telling us the whole story. Yet what we can do is we can look at this full moon in terms of the 90-degree dial. And the 90-degree dial kind of provides an X-ray picture of the lunation or of any chart. And so if we do a a 90-degree dial of this new moon. This full moon on September the 18th, 2024. Now remember, this is what we get. Now remember, with the 90-degree dial, conjunctions, oppositions and squares are shown as conjunctions, and semisquares and sesquiquadrates are shown as oppositions. So there's our full moon, Sun and the moon together. There's our Mercury-Saturn conjunction. In fact, that Mercury-Saturn conjunction is together with the ascendant and the midheaven. So Saturn was square the midheaven. It was conjunct the descendant. Mercury was conjunct the ascendant, square the midheaven. So we see Saturn, Mercury and the ascendant and the midheaven all together. So now we can start to consider the midpoints in this chart. And we're particularly interested in the midpoints of the Sun and the Moon, and we want to know whether those midpoints are special to that location. So we have to really think about the ascendant and the midheaven, because the ascendant and the midheaven are the time and the place. So if we put the full moon on the arrow of the dial, we see that there's a symmetry here. On one hand between Mars, and on the other hand between Mercury, Saturn, the ascendant and the midheaven. So the ascendant and the midheaven are on one side, and Saturn and Mercury are brought together with Mars, with the sun and the moon forming that central axis. So we kind of have a planetary picture here. So you've got the Sun and the Moon are on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. They're on the Mars-Mercury midpoint. They're also on the Mars-Ascendant midpoint and the Mars-Midheaven midpoint. And that's important, the Ascendant and the Midheaven, because that makes it special to that location in Beirut. And also, if we're into hypothetical planets, we can see that there's the midpoint of, there's Zeus. Zeus is a hypothetical planet to do with explosions and can be to do with firearms and violent acts, and there's Uranus. So the full moon is on the Uranus-Zeus midpoint, and I'll just tell you what Vitta says about the Uranus-Zeus midpoint. He says a number of things, but what he says is, in terms of the Sun on the Uranus-Zeus midpoint, he says, the violent person, days of great accomplishment, the man who concentrates and directs his thoughts and energies, sudden, strong explosions on the day. Then looking at moon on the Uranus-Zeus midpoint, he says, persons who obey an order, listen to a command, who are eager and ready. Furies, again, sudden, strong explosions for the hour. Nation in arms. So I think that really does fit the event. So I think looking at the 90-degree dial, we do get the feeling that new moon really, that full moon really was quite important, and it does link with Lebanon. And just a reminder, if we do an astrocartography for that new moon, we can see that at the exact time of that full moon, Mercury was on the ascendant. There's Mercury on the ascendant, going right through Lebanon, and Saturn was on descendant, again going through Lebanon. So those two yellow lines represent Saturn and Mercury very close together. So that is the full moon. And then there's the horoscope of Hassan Nasrallah. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the time of birth of Hassan Nasrallah. I do have a date of birth for him. And here is his chart. This is ahead of Hezbollah. I mean, we don't know whether he's still alive. There was his betting site, which was basically suggesting there was only a 23% chance of him still being alive. At least that is in terms of the betting market. People were betting on whether he would still be, I think, head of Hezbollah by the end of October. And as far as the betting world was concerned, there was only a 23% chance of this actually being the case. Now, I don't have a time of birth, so the ascendant and the midheaven, we don't have that. So Hassan Nasrallah is quite a strong Virgo. You can see that he's got Venus, North Node, Mercury, the Sun, and Pluto in Virgo. Virgos can be quite brutal, and they can focus on the struggle, and they can do it in a sort of a no-nonsense kind of way. We have to do this. This is the thing that matters. We must do it at all costs, and it doesn't matter who gets damaged in the process. And Hassan Nasrallah has no water in his chart, at least no personal planets in water. Okay, he's got Neptune in Scorpio, but a whole generation has Neptune in Scorpio, South Node in Pisces. So he can sort of unemotionally go through with it all and is not going to get distracted. And, he has suffered enormously through this war with Israel, this on and off conflict with Israel. I believe that in the 90s, his son was killed, and I think his daughter may have recently been killed as well. So there is a lot of suffering here, but Virgo seems to be able to just, somehow just go through with it. But it is quite gritty, that Virgo, really gritty. And so, in a sense, that is a sort of a hard person to defeat. I mean, if you've already killed members of their family, but they're still going on and they've got Virgo. And there is a sort of purity of purpose there, you could say, with Virgo. Now, you'll notice that, like British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, he has a Sun-Pluto conjunction. In fact, he's got Mercury, Sun and Pluto together there in Virgo. So that indicates someone who has, I suppose, great strength of purpose, someone who has a desire for power and control, and he perhaps is quite utilitarian about how he sees people. There is his Venus in Virgo. Venus in Virgo can be tough. It doesn't get sidetracked by human concerns. We just have to go through with it. I think it was pointed out, I was reading, about when his son was killed, he said, the family did not shed any tears. It was like their son was martyred, and on the surface at least, they gave the impression of being very unemotional about it. I'm sure that's not the case, but that was the impression they outwardly gave to the world. Now, the Aries point is important when you're looking at someone like Nasrallah. And the Aries point, there's 0 degrees Aries, and you can see that the Aries point is conjunct the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So when you've got Aries conjunct the Mars-Saturn midpoint and you are a powerful leader, this can actually be very dangerous, because your decisions, your actions, your stubbornness can lead to the death of many people. Looking at what Alfred Witter says about Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, he says, general periodic working, general interruption of work, sickness, separation, death. But I think Witter understates the matter. Like Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, has the Aries point, making a hard aspect to his Mars-Saturn midpoint. And I would think that his stubbornness has led to the death of a lot of Ukrainians. And Victoria Nuland, the former, what was she, forget her precise title, who formerly worked in the State Department and very much inspired and planned the coup in Ukraine in 2014 that overthrew the elected president, and it all led to the Ukraine war. She had the Aries point on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So it is very destructive, potentially, having the Aries point on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So that's his chart. Now, as far as what was actually going on with him when this attack happened. I mean, I looked at it. I didn't find a great deal there. Saturn was on his south node, so sort of. So he had south node in Pisces. I think south node in Pisces. I would have said south node in Pisces is about someone who, in his case, will be just a bit too much into martyrdom. Martyrdom is his line of least resistance. I mean, martyrdom is about Pisces. But if it's south node in Pisces, martyrdom is not really the direction he should have been going in this incarnation. Now, of course, he's a Muslim. He doesn't believe in reincarnation, but it's easy for him at some level. Maybe in a previous incarnation, of course, again, he doesn't believe in reincarnation, but it's just something from the past, this obsession with martyrdom. But now he's inflicting it not on everyone, on his country, on his family, and so perhaps on himself. So it may not be the right thing to do. And then you've got transiting Saturn conjunct his south node. That might be, of course, when he just becomes a martyr, and that's the way it goes. And that could be it, but we don't know yet whether he's still alive. Also, Jupiter recently has been conjunct his Mars. So if Jupiter is conjunct your Mars, I suppose you're going to be in the mood for a fight, aren't you? And so I suppose a fight is kind of what he's got, you could say. So that's his chart. I don't have a time of birth for him. And because I don't have a time of birth, it's just difficult to be precise. It just feels itself to be. It just feels the whole thing seems to be a little unsatisfactory. Now, I did look at his solar arc directions. So again, he was born in 1960. So we move all the planets in his chart 63 degrees. So those are his solar arc directions, and so his solar arc directed Saturn is at 15 degrees Pisces. So there's his natal Saturn at 12 degrees Pisces. 12 degrees Capricorn. So 63 degrees onwards, because he's 63 years old, Saturn comes round to making a conjunction with the south node. So he has Saturn conjunct his south node as a transit, and he has got Saturn conjunct his south node as a solar arc direction. And I think that might be important, and I think it emphasizes the point, what I was saying about martyrdom. And it's the south node. It's just this obsession with martyrdom, and it's finally reached a point where it's just perhaps gone too far. Now, I'm not taking sides here, really. I don't think it's appropriate to take sides. I think a lot of people in the region are behaving unreasonably, but I think I would have thought that Nasrallah is one of the people who has been taking things too far, and he's perhaps got his martyrdom, and it's not just necessarily his martyrdom, but it may be other people's martyrdom as well. Now, the person who ordered the strike on the headquarters of Hezbollah was, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu. So here is the horoscope of Benjamin Netanyahu. We kind of know his time of birth. He was born in the late morning. I'm pretty sure he's got Sagittarius rising. So in terms of what was happening to Benjamin Netanyahu when he ordered that strike, well, Uranus was at 2659 Taurus, and Mars was at 2645 Leo. Now, I actually talked about Benjamin Netanyahu's chart, just a couple of days ago, and I did highlight the fact that he had Uranus transit squaring his Mars. Now, the trouble is that it seems to be every few days Benjamin Netanyahu is ordering one kind of attack or another kind of attack. So it's kind of lost its specialness. But Uranus was pretty close to his Mars, very, very close to his Mars at the time of this attack. And I have a feeling that this attack is actually a very big deal. I mean, I don't feel that from an astrological perspective. I just think it's common sense. I mean, I don't know much about Middle Eastern politics, but if he's really killed Hassan Nasrallah, I would have thought that is a very big deal. I mean, Nasrallah is a very important person in the Middle East. If the Israelis really have knocked him out, well, I'm not sure if that bodes particularly well for peace in the region, does it? But it does perhaps stem from the fact that, Benjamin Netanyahu's Uranus is transiting Uranus is square his Mars, and so he's in the mood for launching attacks, ordering attacks, and so forth. And of course, he did it from the United States. And I suppose one should consider what's going on in the United States horoscope. And here is the horoscope of the United States, and we'll see what was happening to the United States when this attack happened. So in yesterday's video, I was just about to mention the fact that Mars on Sirius was conjunct America's Sun. I don't think I did manage to mention it, but okay, I'm now mentioning it now in hindsight. But there is the United States' Sun at 1319 Cancer. Mars is at the time of the attack was at 13.4 Cancer. So Mars is exactly on the United States' Sun. So you can see at the moment there are issues about war and aggression and how you deal with conflict. And I suppose it's not just about the Middle East. I believe that Zelensky recently visited the United States. He's still there, asking for permission to be able to use long-range missiles against Russia. So it is a dangerous time for the United States, and so it does have Mars on its Sun. So war is very much in the air, and let's just hope that the United States can have some sort of control over matters. I suppose it might be helpful the fact that Saturn is about to trine the United States' Sun, so maybe there will be some sense of discipline there. And another thing about Uranus has of course just made a square to has just made a square to the United States' Black Moon Lilith, for what it's worth. So anyway, those are a few thoughts about Israel's attack on the Hezbollah headquarters. And so what I want to do now is look at the week ahead from the perspective of the I Ching. Now, just a reminder, if you don't want your I Ching read, you don't have to have it read. You can stop watching a video. My forecast that I'm about to do only applies if you actually watch it. If you don't watch it, it doesn't apply to you. So anyway, I asked the question, what is the week starting on Monday, September the 30th, going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was the abysmal. Now, just a reminder, when I do this I Ching reading, what I'm doing now is I'm giving a general interpretation of it. I will then look at it from a perspective of money, then business and career, and finally relationships. So in a general sense, the abysmal, it's quite a dangerous hexagram. It's talking about the abyss, getting very close to a deep hole. We don't know how deep. I suppose that's a problem about being an abyss. Does an abyss have a bottom? It just keeps going. It goes down and down and down. And so when you've got the abysmal, what you do have to be very careful. Things can go wrong pretty quickly, and there may not be much of a way to get around the problem. And if we're not careful, we might fall into a pit or we might get stuck. And I don't know what you're involved with. I don't know what's important to you this week, but if there's something you're trying to do and it's difficult, I don't think you should expect things to resolve themselves easily. There is this image here of falling into the abyss, not being necessarily destroyed by the abyss, no, certainly not being destroyed by the abyss, but the I Ching is kind of telling us how we need to deal with the situation. And I Ching is saying, well, if you're stuck, you can't do anything. In the short term, you perhaps have to stay where you are, because if you try to get out of the situation, you may make things worse. If you try to continue with the situation, you'll make things even worse. So perhaps what you need is to wait for perhaps help to arrive, or for you need to get assistance. So it does talk about a potentially a difficult situation that we can't just leave of our own free will, that we might actually need some help. So that is something that we need to be aware of. Fortunately, though, we have the fifth line moving. And so with the fifth line moving, it does seem that we get some kind of opportunity to resolve things for ourselves. We find a place of safety, and we understand the dangers, but we're able to sort of work our way through, and in the end we should be able to get out of the situation. So I think it's not as bad as it looks. So I think the message here with the abysmal is don't panic, but don't be in a hurry to resolve a matter, because I think it is the case that when we are in a difficult situation, when things aren't going right, the temptation is just to press the exit button and just get out of the situation. We don't care how much we lose, how much we get damaged. We just want to get out. But that's not the right approach. We have to be patient. We have to get ourselves out of the situation slowly, and then in the end we will find a way to resolve matters and to return to some level of some level of stability. And in fact, what the I Ching tells us, it's an interesting image, and the image it gives to the fifth line is of being buried alive. And now that doesn't sound good on the face of it, being buried alive, but the idea is that you're being buried alive, and the thing is that there isn't actually enough earth around to bury you alive. So the person trying to bury you alive runs out of earth. And so because they run out of earth, you're not fully buried alive. And actually there is a way out. And it's just a situation where your enemies, whatever is trying to destroy you, trying to drag you down, simply doesn't have the resources in order to do it. And so that can be sort of quite a relief if you're in some kind of conflict situation. Now, this hexagram, the abysmal, does move, and because we've got two moving lines, and it moves to hexagram 46, which is pushing upward. And again, there is this link with things happening underground. We've just talked about being buried alive, but pushing upward gives us the idea of perhaps tunneling, and then finally finding a way to move up and get out. And it almost feels like a tunnel in one of those sort of Second World War prisoner of war camps, where they would dig a tunnel under the fence and find a way to get up. And perhaps that's what we have to do. There is a way out, and pushing upwards does talk about gradual progress. We are making progress. So that first hexagram of the abysmal is perhaps not as bad as it seems, and if you think about the pushing upwards, perhaps you go down into a pit, and once you're in a pit, there is actually a way to dig around, dig through, and to push up, and actually to appear on the other side of the fence. So I think that is quite an optimistic message. Now, looking at things from a financial perspective, and with the abyss, the abysmal, it is possible that money-wise things aren't great this week, at least at the beginning of the week. You may feel that financially it's very difficult to make progress. You may just feel stuck, and you might want to sort out your finances, but somehow you can't. You find that whatever you try to do, there's financial problems, something in terms of money that it just will not go away. And it might be some kind of argument you're having with someone, or just money is not really resolving itself. And if you try to make financial progress, it may actually feel as if it's being made even worse. And so perhaps you need to just take stock of the situation and perhaps do nothing. It's not about spending more money, or perhaps continuing to make financial mistakes in a way that you can somehow resolve the situation. That's not the right approach. Maybe you need to wait for the situation to resolve itself naturally, as I think it will do. Still, there may be a feeling that there's I don't know, one thing has to be paid for, another thing has to be paid for, and you might just feel that it's just getting overwhelming. But I think at a certain stage, the demands on you financially will just level off. It won't completely overwhelm you. And so it does seem that you can then start to move to a different hexagram, and then with two lines moving, you can move to hexagram 46, which is pushing upwards. And so I think at a certain stage in the week, you will find that you can start making headway financially. And it may take its time, but you will start to see a way out, and it's just not quite as bad as it looks. And so I think probably by the end of the week, you're going to feel more confident about your finances than at the beginning of the week. Turning to career and business, the situation is unsurprisingly not particularly good, at least in the first instance, because we've got the abysmal. I think that you do feel at work that if you are working, of course you may not be working, it may not be of any relevance to you, but if you are working this week, you just may feel that things are difficult, that you're not finding it easy to make progress, and if you have to do something at work, it may quickly become very, very difficult, and you might feel almost stuck. Or in terms of your business, if you have a business, there may be a rough patch coming up. Short term, because remember this is only a reading for the week. So perhaps for a couple of days, you may just get involved in a situation that you just can't get out of. Maybe you've sort of made a commitment, or you started moving in a particular direction, and you can't just take it back, and you just kind of have to persevere. Maybe you might have volunteered for something, or you've been given a particular responsibility and you're finding it's really difficult, but once you've started it, you can't give it up, but you can't make any progress. So it may be bothering you. So perhaps what you have to do is you just have to wait it out, do what you can, but not force the pace. And in the end, some kind of assistance or relief should will eventually emerge. And there is a limit, I think, to how bad things can get. It's like I said when I was talking about this hexagram from a general perspective. It's like being buried alive, but there simply is not enough earth to bury you alive. Someone might have a bad intent. The universe might be trying to bury you alive. Well, the universe always knows what it's doing, but just the earth runs out, and there's not enough earth to overwhelm you. In other words, from a career perspective, there's just not quite enough pressure to break you. You're able to start to right yourself, to start to get to grips with things, and then this allows you to move to the second hexagram, which is pushing upwards. So I think by the end of a week, in terms of whatever you're doing, I think that you will be making progress. What seemed to be an impossible task or an impossible job, or perhaps you'd committed yourself to a piece of work that just seemed impossible, by the end of a week, you will be able to sort of crawl out of the earth, and you will very much be alive and, I think, prospering as well. And finally, there is relationships. So the relationship situation with hexagram 29, the abysmal, is, it could be better. It may feel that certain relationships aren't going anywhere, but it's not that you can just end a relationship or get out of a relationship. You're stuck with what you've got. And I'm not just necessarily talking about romantic relationships, any kind of relationship. You are in relationships and you cannot get out of relationships. You can't make relationships work better for you. It's just may feel that you're just stuck with someone, or stuck in a particular state within a particular relationship, and it just doesn't feel very satisfactory. And there's not much you can do short term. If you try to get out of a relationship, it will make matters worse. If you try to get closer to someone, that will make matters even worse. So you just have to wait it out until there's some sense of resolution. Although there will be some kind of resolution, it will still feel that things are just getting more and more intense, and it will feel that things just cannot get any worse. But it reaches a peak, and that peak is something you can actually handle. So I don't think you should worry too much about the situation, because however bad a relationship is, however trying it might be, however much effort it takes to stay the course, in the end there will come a limit. It's back to that theme of being buried alive. There comes a point where it just can't get any worse, and actually things do start to improve, and that leads to the hexagram 46, which is the second hexagram. And this hexagram indicates that you start making progress, you start to being able to establish your identity, who you are, what you want, and you are given the recognition you deserve, and perhaps you're given the respect you deserve. And if you want to change a relationship or somehow make it more satisfactory for you, then I think by the end of a week you will be able to make some progress, because it is about pushing upwards. You are getting there. You are able to establish your identity. So it starts off looking not particularly good, but I think in the end you can get to grips with relationships. That shouldn't be a problem. Anyway, that's all I've got to say for this week. I think I was pretty brief. I don't think I was particularly inspired, but I I think I did have to say something about that attack in Lebanon. I do think it's dramatic. I mean, I think that it's not a trivial event at all. So I don't know. We'll have to see what happens. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. And if you happen to enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. And if you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again very soon.